Hello again, everyone. My name is David Bastl. I'm the host of the Real Estate Edition podcast. I am flying solo for this introduction of the podcast as my co-host Sean Morrison and I are practicing physical distancing, and we hope you are too. This is certainly an unprecedented time in history. COVID-19 has taken a major toll on all industries across Ontario and the rest of the world. The OREA team is continuing to work with the government and industry to support realtors during these tough times. We hope everyone is staying safe. Sean and I wanted to take an opportunity to look back at simpler times and revisit some of the chats we had with a few of our speakers at our REALiTY conference in Niagara Falls back in February. Today, we're kicking off this bonus series in 3 short interviews that we had with a few of our keynote speakers, Seth Godin, Hahn, and Chris Voss. First up, Seth Godin, a member of the Direct Marketing Hall of Fame and author of 19 bestsellers. His latest, What to Do When It's Your Turn. Enjoy.
You're listening to a special episode of The Real Estate Edition with host Dave Bastl and OREA President Sean Morrison.
Seth, great to talk to you just about your speech and everything about it today. Some takeaways, maybe a couple takeaways of what people were listening to this morning.
Well, I think the most important thing I talked about is that we are living in a revolution. And what revolutions do is they destroy things that are perfect, and then they enable things that are impossible. And if you had said to somebody in the real estate industry 50 years ago, do you think I would be able to sit at a machine and see every single place it's for sale and how much it costs and every picture, et cetera, et cetera? They'd say it's impossible. And here it is, destroying the perfect. So what it means is that we still need a human interaction, but it's not somebody who has information we don't have. And that shift opens the door for a different kind of professional posture for somebody who really wants to build a career in this industry.
Now, Seth, I know you've had 19 best-selling books in 36 different languages, so I think it's safe to say that you're an expert on this. But what do you think the biggest challenges that face realtors in this new decade are, and how can realtors get ahead of them?
Well, I think the biggest challenge is that most of the people who went into this field went into it for a very specific reason. There are elements of this job that are just magical. It's mostly independent. You get to look people in the eye. You get to earn trust. And it's a job with a playbook and a manual. You don't have to invent a new way to be a realtor. But that's changing because there's a revolution going on. So the biggest shift is to say that my asset going forward is going to be the attention and trust of the smallest group of people that can sustain me. That instead of saying, you can pick anyone and I'm anyone, we have to figure out how to be a meaningful specific, someone who we would miss if you were gone.
Seth, if you could go back when you first started your career, like a lot of us wish we could at times, what's something you would tell yourself at the beginning that you know today?
Well, other than taking more pictures of myself when I had hair, I'm really pleased at all the failures. I have failed more than most people, and those failures have informed my ability to be resilient and to do this work. So I wouldn't warn myself away from any of the failures. I think that what I would say is it's going to be okay. That persisting in the face of what seems impossible is what we got to deal with. The truth is this: the world has never been crazier than it is right now, and the world will never be this normal again.
No, and I think that's an excellent point about working through your failures, because life isn't perfect. We don't win every time. And you offer tips on in your presentation about how to successfully work outside your comfort zone. Could you share a couple of those with us today?
Well, if you are training for a marathon, you don't go to a coach and say, can you train me to run 26 miles without getting tired? That would be stupid. Mm-hmm. Everyone who runs the marathon gets tired. The difference between the people who finish it and the people who don't are the people who finish it figure out where to put the tired. And you cannot go outside your comfort zone without being uncomfortable. That's why we call it that. And so the opportunity is to get used to being uncomfortable.
That's excellent. Thank you.
Seth Godin was inducted into the Direct Marketing Hall of Fame, one of 3 chosen for this honor back in 2013. It's been a pleasure talking to you this morning, and enjoy the day.
Well, thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for coming in.
Go make a ruckus.
Seth Godin was a pleasure to speak with. It was a quick chat, but it was filled with some great insights. And don't forget about his successful podcast called Akimbo, and his blog, which you can check out by searching Seth in Google. Next up was one of the busiest people at REALiTY 2020, Rob Hahn. Rob hosted 2 different presentations and still had time to speak with us on the podcast. Hahn is the founder and managing partner of 7DS Associates, a strategy consulting firm. When he spoke to us, he did what he does best, offer up some conversational insights into the real estate industry. Have a listen. Rob, you had 2 presentations. Could you recap sort of what we talked about on stage and some of the takeaways of those presentations?
Sure. You mean apart from the general tone of depression and demotivation, right? No,
Yes.
it was great. So the first one that I call Age of Capital, I just went through some of the fundamental problems across the board for real estate. You know, for the agent, for the broker, for the Realtor Association, for the MLS. You know, those to me are the 4 sort of main components. And the fundamental problem, just because we're recapping, for the agent is hyper competition. There's just way too many real estate agents for the amount of transactions.
Right.
For the broker, it's the fact that you have an inverse relationship between agent productivity and broker profitability. It's the only industry that works that way. And then the second one for brokers is that they don't control the consumer experience because they don't control the real estate agent because they're independent contractors, right?
All of them, yes.
All of them. So for the Realtor Association, I think the biggest fundamental problem is the fact that the Realtor brand doesn't mean anything because everyone has it.
Right.
And then for the MLS, it was just simply that they don't have any capital and they have no way of raising any because they're not for profits, but they have to, produce technology and services. So the big concern there is that it's really the obsolescence because of a lack of investment.
Right.
So that's the problems. The solution then sort of comes down to, I think, the way I would summarize it is, we're really obsessed with technology right now in real estate. And I think this is fighting the last war. The time to have been obsessed with technology is probably in the 90s and the 2000s. Because what we're seeing is it's not about tech anymore. It's about capital. It's about companies that have literally billions of dollars to go and do things like iBuyer, where you can go and
Correct.
just buy a home, right? It's new type of business models that don't have to make a profit because they've got $100 million in the bank. So I thought really going forward, the recommendation from the first session was really about, don't limit your thinking, because that's something we do a lot, right? We
Day-to-day life, actually, not just in this situation.
Correct. But I think especially for real estate, I think it does have to be, we tend to kind of censor our vision. We tend to kind of formulate our plans and strategies and vision for what's possible based on constraints. Like, I don't have any capital, so therefore I have to go and make a profit. Therefore, my vision is going to have to be like this. And I'm saying, look, there's money out there, there's capital out there. If you have a compelling story, a clear narrative, and some idea of what success looks like. So I think people in that room, whether an agent, broker, associations or MLSs, if they could come up with that compelling narrative and have a clear vision of what success looks like, what the future could be, then the question to ask is, how do we get capital to achieve our vision? Not, we don't have any capital, so let's have a different vision like that. So that's the overall takeaway from the first one. The second one I think was a little bit more detailed, where I just wanted to get into, and there are dozens and dozens of things that are happening. What I always find interesting is not what's coming next, because we can all kind of see that.
Yeah.
What I always find interesting, what's coming after what's coming next, right? So I call it real estate next. And I think, the generally it's like things like iBuyer, the fact that we don't have a really good idea what that is. I think the industry has a real misperception of that. I think for you all, especially here in Canada, it's worth paying attention to what's happening with us in the US in terms of the antitrust lawsuit having to do with commissions. Is that happening here? Who knows? All I'm saying is this is happening with us. And when I look at it, because our systems are so similar, is something you all need to at least be concerned about paying some attention to. And the third one, which I think is sort of my favorite topic, is about millennials.
Why is it your favorite topic?
Because
none of us are millennials.
None of us are millennials.
What are you saying?
It's because it's for a lot of reasons, but the important ones are, number one, ever since I got into sort of residential real estate back in like 2003, we were talking about millennials are going to save housing, right? Because it's the largest generation, right? That's number one. Number two, I feel like there's this perception of millennials as being a particular way. Whereas if you actually research them and like look into it, it's completely wrong, right? And we tend to operate as an industry as if millennials are like this elite, wealthy, spoiled brat, kind of stuff. And the point I want to make was if we actually look at what's really happening, the reality is so far different from that, right? And in fact, what's happening is millennials are the most divided generation ever. And that's true for both the US and Canada, where the elites are more elite than they've ever been. But the vast majority, and I'm like 85% of millennials are actually living through some of the worst, so I call them generation screwed, right? And for housing especially, the thing that does not get talked about. So here's what we talk about with real estate. We talk about like, they don't like owning, they want to be renters. They want walkable cities, their technology, and have all these expectations and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, look, the thing that none of us are talking about, which is probably going to be the most important factor, the most important driver for millennial home ownership, is the fact that they're not getting married. And that is a problem that's even more in Canada, because Canadian attitude towards marriage is like, who the hell needs to get married? I mean, it's like there's surveys and studies that are showing that. And there's a lot of studies that show that marriage and homeownership is directly correlated. And I think it's actually a causal relation. It makes sense, right? You're single, you're dating some girlfriend, like, okay, we could just live in this nice one-bedroom apartment. You get married, like, hey, let's start a family. All of a sudden, like, hey, we need to buy a place. And so I actually think it's a really big issue that does not get talked about enough. So.
Now, Rob, I want to go back to something you said earlier about fighting the last war in the technology front, so to speak. Yeah. So if we're talking for our realtors and for our listeners here, what would they have to do to get out of their comfort zone and future-proof their business, in your opinion?
So since I believe that it's about whether you have capital or you don't have capital, right? I mean, that's a place to start. But for agents specifically, I think the question is this. How much can you do, right, as an individual agent? Like, really, let's get real about this. Part of this, and this is something I brought up in the Age of Capital, thing as well, is we're starting to see the rise of these super teams, right? I've introduced one team that I'm convinced is something like north of $3 billion, 3,500 plus transactions.
Yeah, with multiple agents.
Correct, with, dozens and dozens of team members. Yeah. So I look at that and I say, okay, you're an individual agent, you have a strong relationship with your client base and whatever, and you farm a neighborhood of 500, great. And you could sustain some decent business like that today. If you're going up against that agent team in the future, can you? That's like just a real legitimate, I don't know the answer to that. Yeah. Some people I might be like, no, absolutely. My clients are completely loyal to me. Okay, maybe, right? Maybe.
Well, I think in some ways it comes down to what do you view as your success metric. If your success metric is $120,000 a year and keeping a roof over my head and driving a decent car, maybe that 500-person farm works. If your success metric is, hey, I want to be the number one real estate agent in the world, then you have a much different metric. So for the average realtor out there on the street that just wants to make a good living, take care of their clients and that, is there a tip you can give them to future-proof their business?
So here's why it's hard for me to answer that question directly, right? And I'm not trying to weasel out of it. It's because it's painful, right? Because the way I look at it is, you might think your clients are loyal to you. You have such a strong relationship with them. I guarantee they're more loyal to their kids. So if the issue is some agent team with, 5,000 members or with this huge technology and scale, if they could come in and say, I could sell your house faster and for more money than the guy that you've known for 20 years, a lot of your clients are going to switch because they might love you, but they love their kids more.
So it comes down to a value proposition.
It comes down to a value proposition. Yep. So the issue becomes, as an individual, can you compete with a bionic super team? So from a future-proofing standpoint, I say, okay, can you become a bionic agent? By bionic agent, I mean technology is table stakes at this point. So I'm not like having technology is not going to lead to whether you win or lose. capital is what you need. So things like the fact that these agent teams are now starting to move to employee models, where team members are employees, so they can direct and get them to do, like, it's things like that, where they can go and invest $100,000 a month on marketing and lead generation efforts because they have that kind of capital. As an individual agent, can you keep up? Again, some people are just going to go, listen, I have my 20 clients, or I have my sphere, and they love me and they're never going to leave me. Okay, maybe, and that maybe it's a legitimate future-proofing strategy. Just from a corporate, like, because I do business strategy, I'm like, I don't love any strategy that depends on they're going to love me. I just don't love that. That's not a strategy. That's a personality. That's a you're lucky. You're just great, right? Yeah. But that doesn't feel like future-proofing, because people ultimately love their family and their kids more than they love you, right? And if they're going to save $2,000-$3,000 going with somebody else, good luck. That's a tough competition to have. So I think from a tip standpoint, it sort of comes down to if you agree that the future of real estate is going to be dominated by teams, then I think you either have to start a team or join one. And that's hard to hear. And I know a lot of agents are going to go, you're crazy. You know what you're talking about. I'm like, maybe. I'm not insisting on it. Maybe I'm completely wrong. I just know that real estate's a zero-sum game. And the fact that agent team did 3,000 transactions means that all of the rest of the agents in that market did 3,000 fewer. Right? That's just the way I look at it.
He's known as the notorious ROB, Rob
Yes,
Hahn.
sir.
It's been a pleasure.
All right. Thank you very much. It's been real fun.
Among his many accomplishments, Rob was also named on the Inman 100 Most Influential People list. Our final interview was an exclusive one-on-one chat with OREA President Sean Morrison and former FBI hostage negotiator Chris Voss. Chris is the co-author of the book Split the Difference and CEO of the Black Swan Group. Enjoy.
Chris, I know you just came off of our reality stage, so thank you for coming on the podcast and answering some questions for our listeners.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Let's talk about your stage presentation today. So what tips were you giving on the stage, and what was your presentation all about today?
Yeah, it was about really adding stability into an unstable and stressful event, which is buying and selling a home.
Okay.
And people don't know it's one of the 5 most important moments in anybody's life, the largest investment they're ever going to make. While an agent is there to bring happiness and joy for the purchase of a home, it's stressful.
It is.
So how do
it's
you
stressful for all parties.
How do you smooth it out? How do you use the late night FM DJ voice to smooth it out, right? Stuff like that.
Oh, excellent. So can you give us some of your key negotiating strategies? I know you've got a very successful book out there, Never Split the Difference.
Never Split the Difference.
And you were a former FBI hostage negotiator.
Yep, lead international kidnapping negotiator.
Excellent.
I get you a deal on a hostage.
Oh, there you go. I don't think I need a hostage, but in negotiating, which is something realtors do every day,
right.
what are some of the key negotiating strategies that you would recommend that we use?
What people want most is to have their say. So the counterintuitive thing is let the other side have their say and make sure they feel heard. People are remarkably more agreeable having felt heard. Most people come into a negotiation and are trying to make their point, make their argument, have their say. And you get two sides that are trying to make their point, which means nobody's listening. So you just take a step back and let the other side have their say. They'll actually relax, having felt heard out, and they're more likely to give you the deal.
Now, I know in your book you talk about the use of mirroring as part of a hostage negotiation or a part of a negotiation that our realtors would use every day. So when we're looking at that and we're listening and we're hearing what they have to say, can you explain for our listeners what mirroring is?
What mirroring is?
Yes. Do you want to backtrack on that one?
No, I just mirrored you. I just wanted to do it too.
That's exactly what it is.
All right, so you mirror what somebody's just said, and then you go silent. You let somebody talk. What mirroring is, it's a great substitute for really what did you mean by that. And through the course of the conversation, a lot of times everybody struggles with saying things just right. And you and I are probably thinking about the same things, but in different words. So if I mirror you, it's going to put some time back into the conversation. And it's going to give people an opportunity to expand on particular critical ideas. It's actually, in description, just repeating the last 1 to 3 words of what someone just said, or selected 1 to 3 words. It couldn't be simpler. But it's also difficult to learn how to do. And then it becomes a great amplifier in conversations.
Now, I noticed, Chris, that you're quite a calm person. Was this always your demeanor, or was this something that you kind of had to learn and polish over time?
No, everything's learned.
Yeah.
You know, Daniel Coyle wrote a great book called The Talent Code, and Coyle pretty much contends that everything is learned, and that there's no such thing as a natural prodigy, and can point to most of the people that are thought of as prodigies, and they just got interested in something sooner than anybody else did, got started at 10,000 hours. So that's a long answer to my voice is learned, and you can learn anything if you put in the time, just about.
So speaking of that, I mean, what role does emotional intelligence play? Like, how can you keep your emotions in check in a stressful negotiation?
Well, emotional intelligence either makes you or breaks you, and there's no middle ground. So how do you keep your emotions in check in a negotiation? Actually, the fastest hack is to be genuinely curious, because you can't be angry and curious at the same time. So if you're really interested in where people are coming from, and you genuinely want to know, even if they said something that sounds insane, if your thought is like, wow, I want to find out what makes you think that insanity, instead of saying, that's insane, hey, don't you know it's wrong? Well, you're out of curiosity. Curiosity is the hack. And if you practice curiosity, like any other skill, then it becomes your default state, but only with practice.
And I just wondered for our listeners, what role does confidence play in a negotiation? Is it best to be really confident in negotiation, or maybe take a bit of a secondary position?
I had an ex-girlfriend. Everybody learns this. I had an ex-girlfriend who used to like to say, I may not always be right, but I'm never in doubt. So, that's people using confidence to cover up their inadequacies. And the problem with that is everybody's run into enough highly competent people that were using confidence to cover up an inadequacy that nobody's completely comfortable with the highly confident person. The 2 millimeter shift is competence, is what everybody wants. And so demonstrating competence goes a lot farther than demonstrating confidence. So confidence is helpful. It should be in your list of top 5. But understand that a lot of people have been, con men, the very definition of a con man is someone who's confident. So it's an interesting trap that everybody stepped into at some point in time.
No, it's definitely a fine line to walk. Now, what are some of the things that our listeners can do to practice their negotiating skills?
Practice, first of all, just practice hearing people out, calming people down. Practice the late night FM DJ voice. But small stakes practice for high stakes result. The Starbucks clerk, the Lyft driver, the hotel clerk, do a read when you check into a hotel. Looks like you're enjoying your day, instead of how are you today, or looks like it's a tough day. That's a great way to practice your emotional intelligence reads, and whoever you practice it on is going to appreciate it. They're going to enjoy it.
No, that's good advice. Now, I know you named your business after the Black Swan. Your business is the Black Swan Group.
Right.
Why did you choose that name, and why was it so important as a negotiating tactic?
Yeah, well, the initial inspiration was that book by Nicholas Nassim Taleb, I believe I pronounced his name correctly, and from 2007 called The Black Swan. And of course, where that idea originally came from was, 16th century Europe. All swans were white, and they thought there could never be a black swan. Then he found them in Australia, and they're like, holy cow, this changes everything. So black swan is something unusual that changes everything. And in point of fact, black swans are everywhere. The small pieces of information, the dynamics that if you could uncover them would change everything. And since they're always there, then, look for the small piece of information to change everything. Conduct yourself in a way that's just slightly different than everybody else so that you become the black swan.
No, that's great advice. Now, if you could give one tip, if our listeners could take one thing out of your book and only apply one thing from that book, what would be the key piece of information that they should take away from it?
Practice hearing people out. You don't need any real skills to just hear somebody out. Make somebody, and never say, I understand. Show you understand. You hear people out by showing what your understanding is. Start doing that, and you're actually going to find out that everything in your life, every type of relationship, whether it's business or personal, will actually accelerate. And it seems very counterintuitive because you're taking extra time to effectively repeat what somebody just said, but it's a real hidden accelerator. It helps in everything.
It sounds like listening is the most important part of a negotiation.
Listening and the demonstration of what you've listened for. Listening is not just sitting there with your mouth shut. Some of it is, but you got to talk. You have to demonstrate understanding. The old cliche, 2 to 1. 2 ears for your one mouth. In point of fact, it's 5 to 1. You got to talk, but you got to be not talking 5 times as much because you got 2 eyes, you got 2 ears, and you got a nose. Each one of those, you're sensing where people are coming from. And it's a collection of all the data that you're getting off them. So demonstrate your understanding. Talk a lot less than you listen and demonstrate what you've heard. And it's a great accelerant.
Now, when it comes down to negotiating, is there a time to get aggressive with somebody?
No.
Because there's a negotiating strategy, or does it come across as pushy?
Now, there's a difference. There's a difference between being assertive and being aggressive. We teach people to be assertive, but you don't have to be a jerk to be assertive. I mean, there's a phrase. I'm told the Brits got a great phrase. You can be as rude as you want as long as you're polite about it. Well, that's really, you have to advocate for yourself. You have to advocate for yourself. You have to advocate for the people you represent. You don't have to be a jerk when you're doing it. I mean, the other side's got to know where you're coming from. You can do it in a nice way. Everybody loves a straight shooter. A straight shooter is a person who advocates for themselves and their interests. They're just not a jerk when they do it.
Now, I know you talk about in your book that there was a point in your hostage negotiating career where you kind of had a massive shift in the way that you thought about hostage negotiation, which led to a lot of the tactics that you have in Never Split the Difference. Can you explain for our listeners what that was and why it was such a massive shift from the norm?
Well, there's actually probably a couple points. One of the big shifts was it worked a kidnapping where it went bad. The bad guys didn't release the hostages. Family representatives made a deal with the bad guys, and they didn't let them go. And about a month and a half, 2 months after that, there was a botched rescue attempt where hostages, the remaining 2 out of 3 remaining hostages were killed. And it was just like, it was a train wreck all the way around. We thought the hostages were coming out. Not only did they not come out, now the bad guys didn't kill them, but they still got killed. So we had to get better, had to learn, had to get better, and that was when. We did a review of our procedures and we did everything we knew how to do. And that was when I ended up at Harvard, because I was like, if we did everything we know, we don't know enough. We have to learn more. And we made a subtle but significant shift at that point in time in how we asked for proof of life of hostages. And we changed our proof of life strategy, and it changed everything.
So always be learning, right?
Yeah, the only sustainable competitive advantage is the ability to learn.
Well, thank you very much, Chris. This has been the Real Estate Edition podcast, and our guest today is Chris Voss. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thanks, brother. Happy to be on. Thanks.
Thank you.
Well, that about does it for this month's podcast of the Real Estate Edition. Before I go, I want to let you know that OREA has launched a COVID-19 website with everything you need to know about COVID and real estate in Ontario. Check it out if you haven't already, www.oreacovid19info.com. One more time, that's www.oreacovid19info.com. For OREA President Sean Morrison and myself, David Bastl, thank you for listening, and we will talk to you again soon.
Visit OREA.com/podcast for more information, links, and a full list of our episodes to date. New episodes are out the second Tuesday of every month.